Hi there, I'm Rabbi Nachum Meth with the Las Vegas Kollel. This Tisha B'Av, I'd like to share with you a really powerful story that I hope will be really inspiring and teach us a very practical lesson on how we can really improve our relationships. I want to tell you the story of two people you've probably heard of, Thomas Jefferson and John Adams. Adams and Jefferson first meet in 1775 at the Second Continental Congress in Philadelphia. They immediately became very close friends. Although they had different temperaments, Jefferson was very quiet and reserved and Adams was much more brash and outgoing, they immediately hit it off. The truth of the matter is they had a whole lot in common. They were both brilliant, both very, very well read and very well educated. And they became very close friends. Adams, a few years older, would kind of view himself as a mentor towards Jefferson. Of course, they would work together in 1776 and they would write together the Declaration of Independence. And although Jefferson was the primary author, Adams, of course, gave a lot of inspiration and a lot of help. And they became very, very tight and very, very close with one another. They would go together later in the Revolutionary War. They would go together to France to serve together as commissioners working with the French. And their relationship became even closer. It was while they were in France, Thomas Jefferson became somewhat of an uncle to John Adams' son, John Quincy Adams. And it was there while they were in France that the Adamses, both John and Abigail, his wife, they would virtually raise Jefferson's daughter Polly, raise her as their own daughter. They became so close. They became the closest of friends. But like many relationships, sadly, when they came back to the United States after the Revolution, during George Washington's first administration, while Washington is the president, John Adams, of course, is the vice president, and Thomas Jefferson would be the Secretary of State. And like many relationships, sadly, Adams and Jefferson, well, they grew farther apart. Politically, they just didn't see eye to eye. Adams was from the North, Jefferson was from the South. Adams represented industry. Jefferson represented agriculture, farmers. Adams was into national rights, federal rights. Jefferson, more of a states' rights kind of guy. Slavery, abolition, big government, little government. They just didn't see eye to eye, and they would grow really far apart from one another. Adams, of course, becomes the second president. Jefferson was his vice president. But it was during Adams' second run for president, Jefferson actually ran against him. And Jefferson would beat him and become president, and Adams, he lost. And they wouldn't speak to one another. Adams was so upset with the political differences that he had with Thomas Jefferson, he didn't even stay for Jefferson's inauguration. And they wouldn't speak to each other for another several years. Their political differences, their values, their ideals, they just created such a wedge between the two of them that they grew estranged from one another. They wouldn't talk. They hated one another. They couldn't stand each other. Who used to be best friends, well, they ended up becoming the worst of enemies. Tragically, I see this all the time as a rabbi. I see two people that used to be great friends, or maybe they were relatives, parents, children, siblings, closest of friends. Earlier in their lives, they were very close with one another, and then something happens, and there are misunderstandings, hurt feelings, harsh words are said, and estrangement settles in. And the two friends, well, they become enemies. The parent and child, they grow farther apart. Siblings don't speak to each other for many years. It's heartbreaking as a rabbi to see it, and I see it sadly all the time. You know, the Chavetz Chaim tells us, great Rabbi Yisrael Meir Kagan, he writes that we know, of course, the Talmud tells us the second Beis HaMikdash, the second temple was destroyed because of sinas chinam, because of what we often translate as baseless hatred. The truth of the matter is, we use that translation, sinas chinam, baseless hatred. The truth of the matter is, it's not a very helpful translation. Although it's a fairly accurate translation, it's not particularly helpful. And here's why. When I look at my relationships, I know why I don't like other people. It's not baseless. I don't like Bill, for example, because he's a jerk. He's rude. We don't see eye to eye. It's not baseless. It's for very good reason. And a lot of times, because we translate those words, sinas chinam, as baseless hatred, there's a disconnect between sinas chinam, between baseless hatred and ourselves. Because we have good justification. We have very good reasons why we don't like one another. I can explain with great detail why I've got dysfunctional relationships, why I can't get along with other people. It's not baseless, it's for very, very good reason. Truth of the matter is, great commentary Rashi in the Talmud explains that the word sinas chinam, baseless hatred, doesn't really mean baseless. He translates or understands sinas chinam as unjustifiable hatred, as hatred that's not halachically warranted. When we put it in those terms, the truth of the matter is almost all of the sinna, almost all of the anger and animosity and hatred that we have towards one another in our relationships, they're not halachically justified. They are not warranted according to Torah law. And when we think about it in those terms, it then becomes very apparent that we all probably suffer from sinas chinam. Nowadays, most of the relationships and the conflict and the dysfunction that we have in our relationships, it does fit under that category of sinas chinam, of baseless hatred, or better translation or better interpretation based on Rashi would be unjustified hatred. And I think it's a very helpful way of looking at sinas chinam, unjustified hatred. We have a lot of conflict in our lives, but can we really justify it from a halachic perspective? Probably not. And of course, the Chavetz Chaim tells us, when we talk about sinas chinam, unjustified hatred, being the cause and the reason why the Beis HaMikdash, why the temple was destroyed, and why we as the Jewish people have been in exile for so many centuries, the Chavetz Chaim, of course, points out, if it was destroyed because of sinas chinam, if we were exiled because of unjustified hatred, it's certainly true that the Beis HaMikdash is not going to be rebuilt, and the exile won't end until we eradicate this sin of sinas chinam, until we're able to get past our unjustified hatreds in our relationships. The Chavetz Chaim urges us, if we all want redemption, we all want the exile to end, we all need a little bit of salvation in our lives. Chavetz Chaim urges us, well, the place to start is sinas chinam, is working on our unjustified hatred in our relationships. We've got to work on our broken relationships. And we see so many people who have, real strains in their relationships. And whether we're talking about real estrangement between siblings, former best friends, parents and child, or other relationships, or whether we're just talking about the normal dysfunctional relationships that we have, the normal animosities, we need to work on those relationships and be able to improve them and get rid of that unjustified hatred. We need to work on our sinas chinam. And it's so hard, and in particular when we think about some of these relationships which seem so strained and so irreparable, we have to remind ourselves relationships can improve. If we put our hearts into it and we want to improve our relationships, of course we can. I'm reminded the Torah tells us one of the great stories. We know the story of Joseph and his brothers, and we know that whole conflict, how there's a terrible misunderstanding between Joseph and his brothers. We know the story. Eventually the brothers decide they need to get rid of Joseph. So originally they think they're going to kill him. They decide instead of killing him, they sell him as a slave. And that's the last they hear of Joseph. Joseph is sold as a slave, and then he's sold from one place to another to another. We know the end of the story. Joseph, after years, ends up in a prison in Egypt, and from one crazy sequence of events to another, Joseph ends up becoming the prime minister, the president of Egypt. And we know the whole story. Eventually the brothers come down to Egypt. They're eventually reunited, and Joseph says, Ani Yosef, I am Joseph. And the brothers are humiliated. After years, decades, they're finally reunited, and they feel terrible for that which they have done. For the fact that they sold Joseph as a slave, that he's been abducted, spent years away from his family. Put yourself in Joseph's shoes for a second. Your brothers, they sold you into slavery. They've kidnapped you. They got rid of you. How much animosity, how much anger, how dysfunctional that relationship must have been. Yet, what do we find? When Joseph and his brothers are finally reunited, Joseph comes over to them and he says the following. The verse says in Parak Memhei in the 45th chapter in Bereshis, verse Yud Bey is the second and the 12th pasuk, the 12th verse. It says, "V'hinei einechem raos v'einei achei Binyamin." He tells his brothers, "Behold, your eyes have seen, and the eyes of my brother Benjamin has also seen ki pi amadabar aleichem, that I'm speaking to the two of you." It's a very unusual verse. What is Joseph trying to highlight? That your eyes have seen as well as the eyes of my brother Benjamin has also seen. And Rashi tells us, we know that when it came to that original sale, when the brothers abducted Joseph, we know that Binyamin was not part of that deal. Benjamin was not part of that animosity, was not part of that sale. And Rashi tells us so powerfully, Rashi says, Hishve es kulam yachad. Joseph was telling them, your eyes have seen, and the eyes of my brother Benjamin have also seen. He's making them equatable. Lomar, he's telling them, Shekashem she'en li sina al Binyamin achi, the same way I hold no resentment towards Benjamin, my brother, who had nothing to do with the sale in the first place. He says, Shari lo haya b'mechirasi, he wasn't involved in the sale. Kach ein belibi sina aleichem. I want you to know, says Joseph, I've got no animosity. I've got no anger or resentment towards the rest of you. Think about that for a second. Joseph had every right and every reason in the world to hate his brothers, to have so much anger and animosity and estrangement and want to get back at the brothers who sold him into slavery. How anger and how much pain Joseph went through. And yet what does Joseph say? We're good. I've gotten past it. Let's kiss and make up. Let's move past it. What a powerful model. What a powerful lesson. Joseph had every reason to hate his brothers. He was able to move past it. He was able to heal. He was able to grow. He was able to rebuild that relationship. You know, we talk about Jefferson and Adams. They didn't speak to each other for like 15 years. They hated one another. They saw the world completely opposite. In 1812, a mutual friend of theirs, Benjamin Rush, he writes both of them a letter. And he says, guys, you used to be best friend. Yes, you have so many differences, but you have so much in common as well. And you care so deeply for one another. And Benjamin Rush said, folks, it's time to bury the hatchet. You guys need to make up. And sure enough, Jefferson and Adams, they made up. They would write letters back and forth to one another saying, you know what, let bygones be bygones. Let's move past this. Let's move past all that pain. Let's move past all that suffering. Now, they still had their political differences, but they were able to say, you know what, let's put a big circle around that. Let's not focus on our differences. Rather, let's focus on what we have in common. And for something like the next 14 years, Adam and Jefferson would engage in one of the greatest literary correspondences ever in the English language. They would write hundreds of letters back and forth between one another, talking about everything under the sun. Their relationship was rekindled. Two former best friends who became the biggest of enemies were able to move past their animosity. They were able to move past their estrangement. They were able to move past all the anger, frustration, and differences that they had with one another and rekindle that beautiful relationship. And of course, almost with divine providence, they both died on the same day, July 4th, 1826, the 50th anniversary of that Declaration of Independence that they wrote together, which brought them together in the first place. What a powerful story, what a beautiful lesson, and what inspiration to each and every one of us. Adams and Jefferson, they saw the world fundamentally different from one another, diametrically opposite, but they were able to work on their relationship and remember that which they had in common and work past their differences, rekindle the relationship, and become best of friends. Now, I know what you might be thinking. Rabbi, that's beautiful and that's great, but I'm no Jefferson, I'm no Adams, I'm no Joseph, I'm not the brothers. I've got real conflict and tension in some of my relationships. I'm not going to become best friends with the people that I really don't see eye to eye with. Maybe it's a brother, maybe it's a sister, a parent, a former best friend. We really can't stand one another. I don't enjoy their company. I don't want to have anything to do with them. They hurt me, they insulted me, they said negative things about me. I don't have anything to do with them. And I get that. But I want to share a message, an idea that I heard from one of my great rabbis, Rabbi Aaron Lapiansky. He shared a message with me once, many years ago, that really changed my life in terms of how I view relationships and fundamentally how I view the mitzvah of v'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. We got to love our neighbors like we love ourselves. We know that's the opposite of what we've been talking about, this concept of sinas chinam, unjustified hatred. Of course, is the mitzvah of v'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. You got to love your neighbor like yourself. The truth of the matter is, when we often think of that mitzvah, v'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, I gotta love my friend like myself, sometimes it seems so distant and so unrealistic that we say the words, v'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, love my neighbor like myself, but we don't really think it's actually going to apply to us in a realistic sense. I've got, as we mentioned, real dysfunctional relationships. I've got real people that I really don't get along with. You really mean to tell me that I'm supposed to love that guy? I might say the words, yes, the Torah says, v'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, but deep down, I don't really think I'm never going to get to that point. It seems so out of reach. Some of our relationships and the people I've got conflict with, there's real reasons for the tension in those relationships. And the Torah says, v'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, it seems impossible. It doesn't seem realistic. We have this image of our mind that v'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, loving our friends like we love ourselves. We have this image of the two of us who are going to be sitting together and there are going to be birds chirping in the background and the butterflies are going to be best friends, laughing together and joking together and having a good time together. And I hate this guy. This guy's a jerk. We don't see the world at all the same way. We're politically different. We root for different football teams. I can't stand his company. I don't want to have anything to do with him. And the Torah tells me, V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, I gotta love him like myself. And we just like, in our minds, psychologically, subconsciously, we don't really think that that mitzvah is realistic. It's never going to apply to me. I'm never going to be able to fulfill that mitzvah. And we give up. We don't even try improving those relationships. My rabbi pointed out, when it comes to the mitzvah, when it comes to that idea of v'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, you got to love yourself, you got to love your friend like you love yourself. He said, go take a look. We know the Rambam, he codifies all of Jewish law. Let's take a deeper look, a closer examination, how Rambam exactly structures what the definition of that mitzvah, what does it actually mean to love your friend like yourself? And maybe if you get a better understanding of what that mitzvah actually really practically looks like, it's not as far off as we might think. The Rambam tells us, Hilchos Deos, Parak Vav, Halacha Gimel, the laws of the Book of Knowledge, Hilchos Deos, 6th chapter, 3rd law. Mitzvah kol Adam, le'av es kol echad ve'echad mi Yisrael kegufo. There's a mitzvah on every Jew to love every other Jew like yourself. Shenemar, as the verse says, v'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. You got to love your neighbor like yourself. And now the Rambam qualifies, quantifies, really lays out what does that mitzvah mean? What does it actually mean to love your neighbor like yourself? Lefikach, he says, therefore, tzarich l'saper b'shvacho, you got to speak only praises about that person. V'lachos amamono, I've got to be careful for all of his wealth, his resources. K'moshu chos amamon atzmo, just like I care about my own wealth, my own finances. V'rotza b'kavod atzmo, and just like I care about my own dignity, I got to care about his dignity. The same way I care about my property, that's how I got to care about my neighbor's property. That's it. That's all the Rambam writes. That's the definition of v'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, of loving your neighbor like you love yourself. My rabbi pointed out, what about loving one another? What about being best friends? What about enjoying one's company and time together? What about having a beer together with every Jew under the sun? What about having a great time and enjoying the presence and the friends and all the socialization that we think of when we think of the mitzvah of v'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, of loving our friend like we love ourselves? Where is that? It's completely absent from the Rambam. Why doesn't he talk about those things? Those are the things that I've got trouble with. When I think of all the dysfunctional, tensional relationships in my life, what I can't envision is sitting down and having a cup of coffee with people that I can't stand. What I have a hard time is the Torah is telling me I got to be friends with that guy. That guy's a jerk. He's a terrible person. And the Rambam doesn't say anything about that. Rabbi explained such a profound idea. We use two words, and we think they're synonymous with one another. Love and like. I love someone, I like someone. My rabbi pointed out this is where language oftentimes makes a real big difference. We often think intuitively that love is just like, but times 10, times 100. It's the same basic emotion, it's just magnified. I like someone, and if I like them a lot, now I love them. My rabbi said that's not true. Loving and liking are two very, very different emotions, and recognize the Torah is not mandating that we like everyone. The Torah is mandating that we love everyone. And there's a big difference. A better synonym for the word love in this context would probably be the word care. I have to care about everyone. I care about their dignity. I care about their property. I care about their well-being. That's what love means. Love means to care in this context. Liking is a personal preference, my rabbi would always say. Liking is who do you want to be buddies with? Who do you want to be friends with? Torah's not telling you need to be friends with everyone. The Torah's not telling us that we need to do a cup of coffee with every Jew under the sun and enjoy their company and want to be best friends with everyone. Torah's not requiring that out of us. The Torah is requiring us to care for everyone. And there's a very, very big difference. I might not enjoy a person's company. I might not like hanging out with someone, but I could also care about their dignity. I don't want to see them hurt in any way, physically, financially, in terms of their dignity. I want to make sure that they're okay. That is a profound idea. The Torah is telling us, v'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, you got to love your friend like yourself. The Torah is telling us we need to care about every Jew. I need to care about every Jew, even that Jew, that person, he's a jerk, he's a terrible person, I can't stand him and I don't want to have anything to do with him. That's great. I need to care for him. I need to make sure that his dignity is preserved. I need to make sure he doesn't face any harm, physically, emotionally, or otherwise. The Torah is not requiring us to be best friends with everyone. The Torah doesn't say, do a cup of coffee, have a beer with every person under the sun. That's not what the Torah demands of us. That's liking. The Torah is not saying you have to like everyone. The Torah is telling us we have to love everyone. We have to care about everyone. I think if we think about that for a moment and realize I don't need to like everyone. By the way, that's even siblings. I don't need to like my brother, my sister. I need to love them. That's a big difference. I need to care about them. Maybe I don't see eye to eye with them. Maybe our personalities really do clash. That's okay. Maybe we can improve on that. Maybe we can't. What the Torah is telling us, I need to care about them. I need to make sure they're in a good place, emotionally, physically, financially. I need to care about their dignity. I think if we recognize the difference between liking and loving, between caring and being friends, I think we'll realize that a lot of our relationships, truth of the matter is, every one of our relationships, we can improve them. We can improve them by caring about the other person, not by liking them necessarily, but by loving them, by caring about them, to making sure that they're okay. I think if we think about that for a minute, give that some pause and give that some reflection, I think a whole new world opens up in front of us. All of our relationships, I really believe we can fulfill the mitzvah of v'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. Love your friend like you love yourself. When we look at it with those lenses, through that paradigm, I think we'll realize even the most dysfunctional relationships in our lives, the people that we can't stand, I could care about them. Be'ezus Hashem, please God, if we recognize this lesson of v'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, love your friend, don't like your friend, love your friend, care of your friend, just like you care about yourself. If we focus on that, please God, that'll improve and get rid of the sinas chinam, the baseless hatred, the unjustified hatred that's in our lives. And please God, if we're able to do that, please God, speedily in our days, very, very quickly, please God, God will bring the Mashiach Tzidkenu, the exile will come to an end, bevias goel, with the coming of the Mashiach speedily in our days.